Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Water Diplomacy, your trusted podcast on international relations and geopolitics. As you might recognize my voice, my name is Fabio. I'm talking to you right now from Mexico, actually, where I'm spending my summer break. And today we have a really interesting conversation with one of my colleagues and friends from my time back in my master's degree there in Brussels. And I think today's topic is going to be really, really interesting. And we're gonna, in a couple minutes, tell you why. But before we do so, I just want to quickly introduce my friend Shasha Roslan. How are you, Shasha? Welcome to Our Diplomacy.
Hi, Fabio. Thank you for having me. I'm all good.
No, it's our pleasure. I remember a couple months ago, no more than a couple months ago, you told me if we ever wanted to talk about the Southeast Asia, the South China Sea region, you would love to be a guest in the episode. So I'm accomplishing that promise today. And for those that do not know Sasha, she's a policy and communications consultant. She studied politics and international relations at the University of Kent. Then she did her master's degree with a distinction in the Brussels School of International Studies of University of Kent as well, where we met, and she studied there international development with a specialization in EU external relations. But at the same time, she's worked for the Institute of Security and International Studies, Malaysia's Economic Trade and Regional Integration Division, and she's also worked at the European Institute of Asian Studies. So as you can see, her work is focused mainly on the analysis of EU Asia Pacific relations. That amazing curriculum is why, Sasha, you are here. And I think today we're going to have a really interesting conversation on the issue. So, how are
Yeah.
you? Where are you at the moment? That's where I would like
So
to start.
yeah, I'm taking this call from Malaysia. I decided to come home from Brussels after living there for 4 years. It's been great getting back to my home country, relearning and rediscovering my own, not just country, but my own region too. And I guess it brings us also back to the South China Sea and how my interest in it has never really gone away. We're going to talk about this, I think, specifically because we all saw the Barbie movie, right?
No, that's true, and it's such an interesting side fact because I don't know if some of the listeners know, but the Barbie film was banned from cinemas in Vietnam due to the fact that it was featuring a map that showed, or apparently it showed China's claim to the South China Sea, something called the Nine Dash Line, which is this set of lines that apparently China claims as its own territory. And well, actually, I'm not sure if it was an intentional thing to appease the Chinese market, if it was just a coincidence. I am not quite sure about it. I don't know, Sasha, if you've heard anything additional about that.
I mean, not additional to it, but also a fun fact on the side that China does not really allow a lot of foreign movies to enter its box office. So I think this has existed for like over 20 years. Countries and a lot of like studios, film studios would do whatever it takes to get themselves into the Chinese like film industry because I think it's about like approximately a 4.6 billion USD worth of money if you get to promote your movie in that country. So I mean, aside from is it intentional or not, it's of course intentional, but is it a political intention? I don't think so.
Mhm.
Is it economic intention? Of course, it's definitely for the money making industries.
No, and that brings us exactly to the source of this problematic, right? The South China Sea's
Mhm.
dispute is one of the globe's most complex and volatile geopolitical flashpoints. It involves overlapping territorial and maritime claims made by China, by Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, by Brunei, Indonesia, and of course Malaysia, right? So the dispute
Mhm.
centers on different islands and atolls in the area, which is filled with a lot of resources, right? So there is a lot of geopolitical, economical importance of this region, right? So that is why I'm sure that not just China, but all of the countries in the region think that this area is so important. So as our listeners know, as every other episode of our podcast, we're going to divide this conversation in three different main blocks. In the first one, Shasha and I will discuss a little bit more on the context. We'll discuss China's moves in the South China Sea and just like a general oversight on our opinions, how we see this issue. In the second chapter, we're going to focus a little bit more on the relations of China with other countries in the region and maybe how they see China's expansionist behavior. especially Malaysia's perspective. And lastly, in the last chapter, we're going to talk about maybe future developments, where things can go, and just our conclusions on the topic. So, Shasha, without further ado, I think we can go first into the first block and maybe just give a general oversight on this issue. So this dispute goes back decades. As early as the 1970s, countries in the region already began to claim these islands and various zones in the South China Sea, such as the Spratly Islands, the Scarborough Shoal, as well as places of their own. But it was only 10 years ago when China was increasing its stakes at the region, moving its navy, trying to have more of a strong control of these uninhabited atolls. So we also saw a claim in the International Court of Justice with the Philippines, and they were having this discussion regarding the China's claiming one of their islands. At the end, the ICJ ruled in favor of the Philippines, and then China did not recognize that claim. So as we see these past decades, there's been way many more conflicts. It's true as well that China has been putting some sand and fortifications in certain islands to increase its ability to control the area. So I ask myself, and I think one of the questions we all ask is, what's going to happen in the future? Is China going to continue increasing its attempt to control the area? What's going to happen to these the destruction of these unique ecosystems? And so many questions that we're going to delve into. But Shasha, first, as you're a national of a country in the area, how do you see these things? What is your perspective on the topic?
All right, perfect. Okay, so for the instance of the South China Sea and China's nonstop encroachment of the area, number one is definitely a matter of security. It has been an issue that has been hovering over Southeast Asia countries for a very long time. But let's just say, like, for the sake of having a well thought analytical conversation for today, I would start by reminding the audience that one of the misconceptions of this issue is that people always think China was the first one to come in, but actually a lot of littoral states have been present in the area for quite a while before China decided to amp up its belligerence in the area. So basically what I'm trying to say is other claimant states have always already been involved in dubious activities, but of course none of the pursuits are extreme as the pursuits of China in the area. The involvement of China in South China Sea is a very hard one to dissect, only because one, the issue of China's presence isn't limited to just the destruction of ecosystem, as you were saying, right? Is the benefits that China may reap once it secures the entirety of the 9-line area. See, the area of South China Sea itself holds a lot of benefits. It has a lot of resources. Not only that, it is an area of like maritime power control. And with this, I mean, what everyone know or probably have heard of is its maritime Silk Road, right? Is the maritime route that if this is secured, then China basically holds the global economic route or maritime route. Given that South China Sea is literally where the Straits of Malacca is at. Literally, this is the second most important maritime route, basically, in the world. So you can see this down to like two things. China's presence, one, is maritime control, again, the maritime Silk Route. And second, the claims of resources, the fisheries, the natural gas that exists, the methane, the crude oil. Now, here's the thing. It's not just China who wants this. Every single state, littoral state, which littoral means like countries that borders it by the sea, really want this resources, this natural resources. Same as Malaysia, Malaysia also needs these resources. For example, because I think we are the top 5 exporters of natural crude oil in the world. And this area is just filled with resources that are basically eminent to a country's economic power and economic pursuits in the long run. Let's not forget, we also have the 5G war running. A lot of the microprocessors and the microchips that are used would require the sources that exist in South China Sea. There's more to it than definitely just like, the damage of the ecosystem or whatnot. It's definitely just power control. It's economic control. Yeah. It is all the control you need. as a country.
No, it's true, and it's a maritime route where a lot of
Mm-hmm.
gas is also taken, and oil as well, into China as well. We have to remind ourselves that China is a country that imports the most oil of any other country on earth. So as a way to try to secure these resources, I mean, I understand that they're trying to, as you could say, safeguard these places. No, having in mind this geopolitical rivalry with the U.S. in a potential conflict, U.S. Navy could potentially block certain areas that where China has access to these maritime routes. So I understand China's logic behind it. And something really interesting that I find, it's the way that China claims to have like the access and the justification to have this area, which is something called the historical rights. That's the way that China is trying to turn the South China Sea into its own lake. And actually, that claim lacks justification according to the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS, because there's not such a thing. And I wanted to ask you a little bit on that, Sasha. Do you think that you can claim that a certain island, a certain territory can belong to you due to something as big as a historical claim on it? Or how do you think,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about the issue?
I mean, of course, on a personal level, definitely not. On also foreign policy level, no countries around the area accept this nine dash line. And this is as simple as saying that you can't just use old maps and claim territories. It's just not how it works, in the modern day scenario. But I would say that's like an easy answer, right? It's like, do they have historical claims? Of course, it existed in old maps. But the harder answer is to ask, why exactly is China choosing to use this to weaponize the claims of like the South China Sea and use it as a primary reason, right? Because technically it really makes no sense. Why would you go all the way to your past and be like, yep, let me take this area because my old maps say so? And here's where I want to bring into what I've studied for a very long time about China's Sinocism and the way they think when it comes to foreign policy. See, a lot of Asian countries when they move forward with foreign policies, ideology is not really our primary pursuit, right? We like at least in Malaysia, we have our politics is very much on like political identity rather than ideology. There's no such thing as are you a liberal, are you a conservative? No, it's more about race. It's more about ethnicity, religion, whatnot. So for China, while that is not the case, they do a lot of their pursuits and a lot of their policies are based on their history. And so one of the things that you have to understand when dealing with Chinese foreign policy is that when they bring out the existence of the nine dash line in their old historical map, to them, to the Chinese foreign policy, it gives a more emotional and crucial meaning to the presence of Chinese vessels and like China in general in the area. Why is this the case? It's because like to them, the meaning of the history in China is connected to the linguistic items of humiliation, quote unquote, outside interference and imperialism. So this has its root in the century of humiliation, which began with the first Opium War in 1940, and all this stuff. So it's like basically pointing out to its historical rights that the PRC entails, and that like China must never be humiliated and dominated by the West again. So the way they move forward is to basically tell the world that whatever you do to us in the past, we will make sure that would never happen again. So when it comes to the South China Sea area, pulling this card, this nine dash line card to them is basically just trying to say like, we're using this and we will put meaning to this to make sure that you will never bring this kind of humiliation to us ever again. So in addition to the historical claims perceived by China, its actions and interests in South China Sea is also a form of stepping up against the Western power and ensuring that the past does not repeat for itself. So like for the Chinese administration, history is a warning that what can happen when two things come together: interference of outside force in regional disputes of South China Sea, and the lack of military ability to defend itself against foreign involvement. So again, Chinese claims will always remain disputable and definitely not accepted, but the question also pegs in, even if they put this out, we have to ask other claimant countries, which are other ASEAN countries, will they or will they not agree to the existence of the nine dash line? And this definitely goes down to foreign policy and what benefits every single country. But I think we'll discuss this in the second block, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, Sasha. And I wanted to use that as a bridge to jump into our second block and maybe talk a little bit about how other countries in the area, such as Malaysia, see this. Because it's true that China, it's a really interesting tactic that they use, because sometimes they don't even deploy the Navy when they try to harass other countries' vessels. They sometimes use what they call like fishery boat militias, something like that. And they use that to maybe try these Malaysian or Philippine ships to change course. So it's not just that, but maybe foreign policy bully and offering maybe boycott of commercial boycotts like they did to Australia. So China uses a mix of force, a mix of economic coercion to pursue their agenda. And I wanted to ask you that, how does Malaysia see this behavior? How do they see China's claims on islands that might belong to that, or that they actually just belong to other countries? What is that perspective?
I think the brutal truth about the situation is that when it comes to foreign policy, it just is always a matter of, does it benefit them? So we have to understand that Southeast Asian countries and ASEAN as a whole do not hold regionalism as high as, for example, the EU, right? Like the EU will come together if one country is being like infringed or something, and they're like, okay, we have to come together because we're sort of legally binded for this. Southeast Asia has never been this case historically, only also because historically, like, we've been separated for the longest of time in terms of our colonizers and in terms of also our language, our ethnicity. We're quite different from each other compared to maybe again European countries, right? So I think it's a very unique situation for Malaysia. Exactly. I mean, like you said before, like, it's interesting. Sometimes they don't deploy navy armies or the navals or something. They just use like fishery boats, and this is definitely true. Like the amount of times they've encroached in the areas of the Bornean Island, and the oil gas rigs in Malaysia is like astounding. Basically, they're saying well, the government is saying, and the news reports are saying, like, contacts are basically happening every day. Like every day we're having contacts with either the coast guards, or the Chinese coast guards, the Chinese fishery boats, or some sort. Like, it's just not ending. But before this, I would say Malaysia was quite quiet about what well, they were quite quiet in terms of like if dispute was affecting them, because it did affect Malaysia up until maybe 2015, 2016, when you could find China really decided to come down south. Because right, like during the early days, there were only two countries that were fully affected, which was Vietnam and Philippines. But now, as China is literally like, China's operations are slowly moving down south, you can find people being more vocal. Ministers are being more vocal about this. Foreign policy works in Southeast Asia is mostly through backdoor channels and backdoor politics, because it's always like important to uphold non-interference for all countries around Southeast Asia, including East Asian countries. This is very much a behavioral situation, right? Because there's so much difference when it comes to how we move forward politically. When you see like global south versus global north, right? I mean, we're like, it's just a different world, like two different worlds. What might be something that would be said directly in a Western country would not be the same for a Asian country, because we're very big on impartiality. It becomes like an institutionalized tool for ASEAN, right? Because there's no such thing as like being mad at like a country posing sanctions. I mean, we do pose sanctions only when it's necessary, but as long as it's not necessary, as long as a country can continue to hedge, like Malaysia, we would. Because at the end of the day, for Malaysia and China, China has been Malaysia's largest trading partner for 14 consecutive years. And the bilateral trade reaches to about $203 billion, about like a year approximately. Um, and so, yeah, so I think at this point, the question is how, not just how Malaysia is dealing with this. Malaysia is definitely hedging. Malaysia is doing what it takes to continue its good relationship economically with China, but while at the same time making sure that China does not really move forward. And the way we do this is by joining a lot of military exercises with the US, being the other superpower that exists in the area. But some other countries, they might just be bandwagoning rather than hedging, like Malaysia. That would probably be like Philippines or Vietnam, the ones that benefit more from the US rather than from China. But yeah, it's very I would say it's a very versatile areas. It's hard to say who would do what because it keeps changing. When a new government comes in, it keeps
Hmm.
changing. We had an old government with an old prime minister who probably the whole world knows who was like impeached and basically is now in jail because of embezzlement. And he had a really, really, really good relationship with China. And our current prime minister is trying to balance that out to make
Hmm.
sure that we do not rely on China as much as maybe the previous offices did.
That reminds me of the case of the Philippines, which I think it was a little bit similar. The previous government
Mm,
was a little bit more in line with China and its foreign policy, despite of the Philippines being a traditional ally of the United States in the area. But now with the change of government, it's true that the Marcos is trying to pursue maybe closer ties with the US. And that's true. I mean, it depends who's in power, maybe where the shift is going to go. And now that you touched about it, it's really interesting the role of the US and other powers in the region, because it's true that the US has always claimed its favor of the openness of the seas and the freedom of navigation. But of course, that the US has geopolitical interests in the area as well. And its rivalry with China, it's there. So it's not like it's altruism for the sake of open seas and trade. No, come on,
mm,
there's a political agenda there. And I wanted to
mm.
ask you about that. Do you think that Asian countries should they pursue maybe closer ties with the US in their pursuit to maybe oppose China, or should they be like in the middle and try to get closer to the US when China is you could say bully, and the other way around, like a middle way? Or how do you
Mm.
think maybe these countries can pursue a foreign policy agenda that doesn't make them dependent on any of the two rival powers?
So a lot of countries are slowly hedging against China, but this also means is good because at the end of the day, when it comes to like the struggles that are happening in Southeast Asia, you can only see this as like it would never be beneficial to the smaller states, right? It would never be beneficial to the claimant states of Southeast Asia. The two existent military power that is there are like countries, well, are the US and China. Well, China is basically one of the claimants of the area. The US isn't, right? So for a smaller state, it's just as simple as pursuing a foreign policy where would it be beneficial to them at this instant or not? I personally see that countries are slowly hedging and rather than bandwagoning as before, because it was easier to bandwagon with the US in the in 2015, 2016. But with change of power, again with like new governments coming through, a lot are actually you can find a lot of countries are in favor to keep
Mhm.
their relationship with China, right? And I mean, as much as that is terrifying, at the end of the day, the question is which lesser evil would you rather choose? And I think that has always been the case for a lot of smaller countries, right? If you think of the
Mhm.
Cold War did not exist between like a direct fight between two countries. Cold War, the reason why it's called Cold War also is because of the
Mhm.
indirect fights that were happening in the tinier countries that were getting the effects of this. So it is not smart. It's definitely not a smart move for a country to just bandwagon all the way because at the end of the day, choosing between the US and China would not reap any benefit for any of us. And
Yeah.
but this will bring me back to a point where in the recent years, ASEAN countries actually have been coming together. And this is really good because we've been trying to introduce so many. We've already have a declaration on conduct, which basically is non-binding, but it's basically a declaration between ASEAN countries and China on how to move forward in South China Sea. Of course, no one's really abiding to this, but the good news is, I think literally very recently, ASEAN countries themselves have like they are in their final drafts of the code of conduct. See, the code of conduct will hopefully be something that is binding. Legally, I can't say, but as long as it's something that everyone sort of have to follow, then that is like I guess is a success point, right? And because now we are now that ASEAN countries have like moved forward in terms of like writing up the code of conduct, is a matter of asking China, will they actually sign this paper with us now? Because it just shows unity, and this is the unity that we want for a very long. We've been wanting this unity for a very long time when it comes to the South China Sea, but clearly now everyone's coming together, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
So we'll see what the future holds.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go. Now, as we're wrapping up the episode, how do you think things are going to move in the future? Do you see China continuing this behavior and continuing ruling its neighbors, getting what it wants, or do you think that the neighboring countries, Malaysia included, are going to push for the opposite, for them and their territories to be respected, their claims to their exclusive economic zones? How do you feel things are gonna move forward these coming years?
It's hard to say if you ever come together with one voice. It's really hard because, again, back to the whole thing about how one of the most institutionalized tool of Asian countries is non-interference. And I mean, it's a matter of time if one day will come as one voice, or will probably be divided because a change of power or some sort. What I envision is that China will continue what it does, of course, but we can see Asian claimant countries moving forward in being more vocal. So I think that's at least a good start. And when it comes to military exercises with COVID and everything opening up, Malaysia has already hosted like 2 massive military exercises. And I mean, this is a good thing, right? Because we're hosts, which means we're also moving to making sure that there's a balance of power here. And as I saw in the latest news, is that before this, encroachments of like Chinese vessels or fisheries are usually met with again backdoor politics. They don't really talk about it in the news, but the current prime minister has been very vocal about how they will still continue to work on the gas field. Again, like a lot of countries have their own gas field, and despite China also directly vocalizing that they're not happy about it, and as it shows, Malaysia is not really worried about it, because at the end of the day, I think China knows that it cannot push too far. I think that's the thing. The US can always be there, and I think in some way it gives us a bit of protection to know that like the US is there. But what is great is that if one day the US does pull away, I can actually see and say that it's gonna be hard for China to try and move forward like abruptly, because at the end of the day, when it comes to the whole historical or whatever you call it, like when it comes to like when you work out history and the history of politics of China and a lot of Southeast Asian countries, it has dated way back. And there's one thing about China, they will never let go of their history. So for them to come down and for them to actually break ties with a Southeast Asian country is nearly impossible. And I know it sounds very optimistic, but it is true, from like based on like hundreds of years of China existing and being a superpower once upon a time, and now it's a superpower again. It would do a bit of aggressiveness, but it would never push all the way to the end, because this is something that it just China would never probably cannot think of doing, especially towards its neighboring countries, if you will. I
Yeah.
mean, China will probably do something worse, maybe to Western countries, but to its neighboring countries, chances are a bit less, I would say.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so, because another
Yeah,
conflict in the world would be catastrophic, especially in
of
such a
course.
crucial uh, area for the economic and commercial system of the whole world. I mean, a conflict in that region would be catastrophic for us all. So hopefully things stay like that, and hopefully China never goes forward with military action against any state in the area,
Yeah.
including Taiwan, the first of them all. Anyways,
Here is to hoping. Yep.
yes, absolutely. But Sasha, thank you so very much for your time. I know it's really late over there. It was really hard for us to get a proper time for us to talk, as it's literally the other side of the planet. But thank you so
Really
much for
was.
your analysis, for everything you've researched, and I think our listeners will appreciate to have a local perspective on topics. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fabio, for taking the time. You are definitely right. It is 12 a.m. on my side, and I'm ready to go to bed.
Sweet. Well, it's 10 in the morning here in the American continent, but listeners, I don't know what time is it where you are listening us from, but thanks so much for tuning in. And here we are for any more analysis of international or contemporary geopolitics. You have our socials, so please do follow us over there. And here we'll be. Have a nice one.